Welcome all to Chasing Tents. My name is Abhi. Thank you very much for joining me to this new video early in the morning, a very hot morning. I've been making a number of videos of all my bikes, tires, upgrades, all sorts for the last 2 days. But I thought I'll use this opportunity to also introduce a track guide, a proper detailed track guide of Taylor Mackenzie, who is a ex-BSB rider, British Superbikes, British Superstock. I mean, the chap is very, very talented, and he also managed a Moto3 team. It's just brilliant. I think his brother is now in World Superbikes, and his dad was in MotoGP as well. So it's a family full of talent. I proactively contacted him after I saw a video of him showcasing his track guide. So not only I got the track guides from him, I'm sure you guys can still go on his website or on his kind of social media links and still get those track guides. And then I told him, I said, why don't we do a kind of video track guide, a detailed one. So this is a lap from Brands Hatch GP circuit, my first time ever, and I've never been there since. It's not very fast. Every session was red flagged, and right at the end of the day, when people had gone, we thought, that's it, we're gonna get some free laps. And guess what? Someone crashed big time, and it caused another red flag. This is not a very quick lap, which is excellent if you are in the Inters group or Novice group or slow fast group. Taylor Mackenzie will take you through the guide. This is me on track and Taylor Mackenzie speaking. You won't see me again in this video in this avatar, but you will see me on the bike, on the track, and hopefully this guide really helps you lot with some great techniques, great tips, and fantastic advice from Taylor Mackenzie. Thank you.
Welcome to your onboard lap review. I have got quite a few of your laps up here. I've been through all of the footage you've sent me, and immediately there's a lot of things I can see just in basic riding terms, and then there's a lot more track specific stuff I can do too. So you're riding an RSV4 1100. One of the first things I can see just looking at your dash is, I believe you've upgraded your dash. If that is the case, and there's an option to switch your shift lights to go from being progressive to all-in-one, then I would change it to that. So what I mean by that is currently your lights come on one by one. So you've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 lights on the dash. And as your revs increase, they go up gradually to the point where you should shift gear. The problem when you have shift lights like that is when you're obviously going fast around the track, it's impossible to see whether you've got 4 lights on, 5 lights on, or 6 lights on. And that means that you'll be inconsistent with where you're changing gear, which is what I see quite a lot on your laps. You're not always revving the bike out as much as you could do. So that's the first thing, if that is an option to change that. If it's not the end of the world. But what you do need to do is be more consistent in how much of the RPM rev range you're using, because some corners obviously you need to short shift, and that's okay, we'll get to that when we do. But a lot of them you're not using all of the revs, and that's just free time, it's free speed. You're costing yourself every straight you go on when you're not using all of the RPM. So that's something really easy to fix, and every single track you go to you'll get free time. I wasn't sure if it was just because it was an RSV4, it didn't rev that hard, but I went through the internet, trawled videos on YouTube. I found one of 44 Teeth reviewing the bike and a few others, and I can hear everyone else revving the bike a little bit more. And also I've seen you in parts of certain straights like Snetterton, I can see more lights coming on the dash than in other sections. So that's something to bear in mind firstly before we do anything. The next thing is an onboard lap of Brands Hatch. So I'm about to play that now, and as I go through that I'll keep pausing the video and show you corner by corner. So first things first is your braking into turn one is a little bit early. When we're really braking late into there, you can go past that white line you can see across the track now, and almost to the point where the track starts kicking up. So you've got a little bit of safety margin on the brakes there as you're approaching that. It is scary braking into turn one, and it's obviously blind when you get there, but the way to combat that is to initially at this first point is do all your heavy braking on the run up to the corner whilst you're upright. So as you cross that white line there, the track kicks up, and where the track kicks up you will have to release the brake, because if you carry on braking hard at that point the back comes off the floor. So that's why sometimes it's a little bit difficult to overtake into turn one. So it's important as you're braking up to that to think about releasing the brake if the back's coming up off the floor. Once you're over that rise you can then brake hard again, and make sure you brake as hard as you possibly can when you're upright, because then you're going to have to start turning into the first corner at Paddock Hill, and when you start turning in you have to start releasing the brake because it starts going off camber and you can't brake as hard. So make sure you're doing all your braking upright. The other thing you can see in the distance there, and you'll see it a little bit better as we get closer, if you look right down the middle of the track, there is a black barrier on the right hand side, on the inside, and then just across from that in the middle is the Marshal's hut. It's a tiny square in the picture there, but that is a good reference point. If you head for that Marshal's hut from here in a straight line and brake upright when you're doing it, you'll have a good reference, and it sort of takes the scariness out of turn one a little bit. So we'll carry on with the lap into turn one. You can see the Marshal's hut in the middle there, it's a little bit more obvious as you get closer. Now here, I can hear you're already accelerating. So that to me tells me quite clearly that you've broke far too early into the corner. So it's really important that you're not accelerating before any of the apexes, because when you're doing that, you've basically gone too slow and then you're opening the throttle to catch the speed back up. So if you're feeling like you're doing that anywhere, you really need to be forcing yourself and pushing yourself on the brakes to get to the point where really when you're getting to the apex you're thinking, oh my god, I've only just made that. If you're not thinking, oh my god, I've only just made that at the apex, then you've gone too slow. And that's really the place where you can progress quite quickly on a track, and that's the sort of area. It's also a very difficult area to go faster in, because obviously that's where trail braking and that element of your riding comes in too, which you can go into more detail on. But really, if you have that in your head, if you're getting to a corner and thinking, I made that with plenty of time there, that was really easy, then you know that the next lap you can brake later. So for this corner, Paddock Hill, you should be working on not opening the throttle going into the corner. The problem when you open the throttle that early is you also lose turning. So if you're opening the throttle before the apex, I've heard a lot of online tuition telling you that you should do that because it makes it safer. Well, the reality is really no one does that in racing. Once you start opening the throttle, that's the point where you just keep accelerating and accelerating. If you open the throttle and you're just sat on a constant throttle all the way to the apex until you're accelerating hard, you're not going fast enough, because if you're doing that, you're sort of not scrubbing off speed the whole way to the apex, you're just keeping your speed at a constant. And really your speed should be going in a V all the way to the apex of the corner. So you had another go at the throttle there. I'll just replay that so you can hear it. So really, when you cross this white line, as you're crossing that, you should be braking all the way to where the track starts going downhill. You're releasing the brake at that point, and then just as you get into the curb, that's the first point you should open the throttle. If, for example, on this lap, you didn't accelerate, just think about how slow you'd be going at the apex. So that's the safety margin you've got on the brakes there. So there was 3 stabs at the throttle there. We're now at the curb, which is the apex of the corner, and you can see how wide you are. So although you've effectively opened the throttle to catch your speed up to get to the apex, because you've opened the throttle, now we're a little bit wide and we've missed the apex of the corner. So in an ideal world, you would have been braking all the way to this point when we're at the apex of the corner, and then you start opening the throttle. Paddock Hill Bend is a very important corner. It's very tricky because it's difficult to know what the surface is doing. It drops away from you and it can be quite daunting. So as you're getting to this inside curb, that's where you should be opening the throttle. And the second you start opening the throttle, you're trying to get the bike off the edge of the tyre and use all of the track. You should be going all the way to the curb on the outside of the track. So we'll see if you do that here. And there you can see you've come out in the middle of the track. And to me, again, that says you could have carried more speed through the corner, you could have accelerated harder, used all of the track on the way out, and that would be a huge chunk of time you would have saved yourself there. So at turn 1, we would have braked harder and later, carried more speed to the apex, opened the throttle at the apex and accelerated hard, but picking the bike up the whole time. And the other benefit of using all of the track there is, if you imagine when you're coming out in the middle of the track, you have to keep the bike leaning over to end up in the middle of the track. To get to the outside of the track, you would have had to pick the bike up to get yourself to the outside. So that's why it's a benefit to use all the track, because you get more speed, you can pick the bike up earlier and be safer on the fatter part of the tyre. So think about that the next time you're there, really using all of the track on the way out, getting yourself to that outside curve, and timing it that as you're getting to the outside curve, you're upright on the fat part of the tyre. Again, braking here, because you've come up in the middle of the track, really you could be a little bit further over. I try and get as close to that white line on the outside when I'm braking as I can, and that really opens up Druids a lot more. Your line at the apex of the corner here is absolutely fine. I pretty much ride exactly where you are now, and the reason for doing that is it lets you drift out and then it opens up the second part of the corner. So again, it's sort of a double apex corner at Druids. You hit the first apex, which you did, drift out a little bit to this point, and then from this point is where you can really start accelerating hard. So again, this is a tricky part of the track, and you'll see a lot of people crash here because the track flattens out just at the point that I'm about to tell you to accelerate. So how do you combat that? The same thing, you pick the bike up. So at this point here, that's where you really start winding the throttle on. You should be really accelerating hard, aiming for where that guy is in front, and using all of the, sorry, not all of the track here, 3/4 of the track on the way out, and you can really feel the bike spin at this point if you're not continuing to pick the bike up. Ideally, you don't really use all of the track, because if you do use all of it, it makes it a little bit harder to get back to Graham Hill Bend at turn 3. So potentially you could have used a little bit more track than that, let the bike drift out, and that would mean you could accelerate harder. Tricky now because there's a guy in front of you, so I won't judge you too much on this corner. So here, I can see we're going in a little bit too tight, and this again is a really tricky corner, Graham Hill Bend, but ideally you want to be with your wheels on the white line on the outside. Now that's a difficult thing to do, and it does catch people out from time to time, including myself. I have crashed at that exact point by letting my wheels run on the outside paint and curb. But the more you can let yourself run down there and get yourself to the outside of the track, the more you're going to open up Graham Hill Bend. And Graham Hill Bend is a really important corner because there's a short straight after it, and we're trying to carry as much speed down this straight as we can. So because you turned in a little bit tight there, and we've got a similar problem to what we had at turn 1, where you've broke a little bit early, you're on the throttle again, accelerating through the corner, And at this point, we're losing our turning effect. With the throttle closed and the brake on, we can obviously keep turning tighter and tighter. But now, because we're having to recover the speed and accelerate, we're losing how much we turn. And at that point, you'll just start drifting wide. And it's important here because you want to be as wide as possible on the entry so you can open the corner up. And if you try to imagine Graham Hill Bend as a right angle like this, it looks like it's quite an open corner, but I always picture it as a corner like this. So we're coming in here and we've started out at the outside curb, and when we approach this part, the straighter part, this is the apex, and I really try and time it so as I'm coming to this part of the corner, I'm upright and my wheels are almost in line with the straight, and at that point you can then pick the bike up, accelerate hard and drive down this next straight. So here you've just been, because we've turned in a little bit tight, we're now leant over and we can't accelerate as hard. If you'd started off at a wider position, we could have opened the straight up more and drifted out to the outside of the track more and been upright and accelerated harder down here. So I feel like now we're at the outside of the track and we're only just getting to the point where we're flat out, when really at the apex of the corner, if we'd been upright, we could have already been thinking about getting as close to being flat out as we can. There, your gear shift I think was a little bit too early. I think we could have afforded to rev the bike a little bit harder. I'm braking in here. You can, I can't tell you how late you can brake in here. It's a weird corner because it's so long, and if you don't brake late in here, you'll find yourself trying to catch up with the throttle the whole way around because it's such a long corner. So this is important, to go in here as fast as you can to carry the momentum all the way to the apex of the corner, at which point you can start accelerating again. So I'm going to hazard a guess here that because we broke early, we're going to have to accelerate, and when we're accelerating halfway around or on the entry to this corner, you can't turn as effectively. The reality was where your speed was actually okay, so you didn't brake that hard going in and carried a lot of speed in, but you've actually ran a little bit too far past the corner now. So what I would have potentially have done is come in a little bit wider initially. If I just rewind that, at this point, this is it's not too bad where you are here. It could perhaps be a metre wider to the right hand side, but this point is where you keep braking and bringing the bike back to the inside of the corner, and I try to aim for, if we look at the curb on the inside now, there's a fat curb and a little curb. That point there is the apex of the corner for me. That's where I have my wheels on the white line, and that's where I really start accelerating. So that's what I'm aiming for the whole way in. I let myself get back to that point, and at that point you can then pick the bike up hard and accelerate at the same time. And the earlier you do that and the faster you do that, the more you start killing the RPM. You get to the peak power as opposed to being in the torquey part of your superbike. When you're in the torquey part of the power here, it really wants to wheelie down that next section. If you can be past the power and at the point where it's accelerating high in the RPM range, your bike will wheelie less and you'll be able to drive faster down there. So that's an important point there. I think you can make a lot of time there by braking a little bit later, braking harder upright, being really patient and getting yourself to the apex of the corner, having your wheels on that white line, and then accelerating at that point, using all the track on the way out. And there's a huge chunk of time just from that apex to the outside point of the track. But what that also does is carry your speed all the way down this straight, and there's a long section of the track here, and you always want to be thinking, especially onto long straights, about perhaps sacrificing a little bit on the way in, because you're going to gain that time in such a huge area on the next straight that that's what you should be thinking about. So your line's good there. I try to get my wheels as close to that white line on the inside as I can. And then let yourself run out to the outside of the track here. Again, you're in the middle of the track here. You want to have your wheels on the white line on the outside, as close to that grass as you can get them, within reason. And your braking was fairly late in there. We always try to brake in the bottom of the dip. That's pretty much the braking marker on a superbike. Obviously, if you're coming out of there faster on a superbike initially, then you're arriving at the bottom of that dip faster as well. I think if If you look at your shift lights again, you definitely could hold the bike longer in the RPM range there. It's difficult for me to see on your dash here. I can't see exactly what you're revving it to, but at a guess that says 7, 9, 10, and I would imagine you're more at 11,000, 12,000 is where you should be shifting. That shift was better there. Another thing at the end of the straights to always think about is when you're flat out accelerating, I try to close the throttle and brake in as short a space as possible. If you close the throttle and then wait to brake, you're effectively just coasting, you're not doing anything. You're not accelerating and you're not decelerating at your maximum potential. So if you find anywhere that you're closing the throttle and then you can count time in between that where you brake, try to minimize that gap. I always try to close the throttle and immediately grab the brake, and that initial part of the brake is where you're trying to load the front tyre to brake. If you are coasting, it's just free time that's easy to make up on every track, no matter where you're riding. Tipped in a little bit early there, I'm sure you realised that because you've had to stand the bike up. If you'd carried a little bit more speed in there, you would have perhaps made it later to that apex and you wouldn't have had to pick the bike up to miss the corner. Your line's great on the way out, using all of the track. I think in here, that's a good example of somewhere into this next right-hander where you could accelerate harder and then you shouldn't have any time to coast, and this next corner you can actually brake quite late in there and use the brakes quite a lot. It's not really, although it's quite fast and open, if you watch superbike riders in there, they're really braking late and the bike's moving all over the place. So again, think about your braking marker in there and try to push yourself a little bit on the brakes. That was another point there where you accelerated, then closed the throttle before the apex. And again, that comes from not braking late enough initially. And then because you've not braked late enough initially, you've had to accelerate to get to the corner. So anyway, now you know that and you can feel yourself doing that, really think about trying to brake later, pushing yourself, getting yourself to the apex a little bit faster. This corner you did that beautifully there. It's important to pick the bike up at this point because there's some big bumps. And the more you can stand the bike up at this point, I try to just be upright, and on a super stock bike just open the throttle to 100% as fast as you can and let the electronics do as much as they can down the hill. But try not to run too wide because you want to be back to the inside of the track down here, which you could potentially be a little bit tighter there if you wanted, but here is okay. The important part from here is you let yourself run out and use all of the track on the outside. And this is really tricky to do here because it's so blind, it's so fast, and it's a tricky corner. So it's quite good when you've got someone in front of you like you do here to use them as a reference. So again, probably could have been a little bit tighter to begin with and then carried your speed. You'd be now drifting wider on the way up here. But that's not too bad, you've used most of the track there. And then in an ideal world, you're just getting on the throttle at the curb there. If you're getting on the throttle before, you've perhaps gone a little bit too slow. That was a nice pass in there. Again, although it's difficult because you're overtaking in there, you can definitely use more of the track. Let yourself run out to that white line as much as you can. That used to be a really big curb with a massive lump in it, and that's completely gone now. It's just flat and paint. So use as much of the track, get on that white line, and if not, as close to the curb as you can. I feel like you're using more of the gears down here, so that was better. And you're braking late in here. You could be a little bit wider on the way in. We're just sort of in the middle of the track here. You could definitely use more of the track, be closer to the left-hand side, and that will open this corner up. And allow you to brake harder upright for longer before you start turning in. Because you're on the inside, you're now having to turn in, and at this point you're going to start releasing the brake. If you've been a little bit wider, you could have afforded to brake a little bit longer and not have to be on the side of the tyre for quite as long. And then here, make sure you're a lot closer to the inside curb, because you've effectively wasted a little bit of track there now. You're going to affect the exit of the corner. As you can see here, because we've missed that, in an ideal world, we would have been at the inside curb on the paint, and at this point you could now be picking the bike up. But because you missed that corner, we're now having to still turn more and keep the bike leant over, which means you can't accelerate as fast. And here I let myself run out a lot wider. So that paint on the outside, I tried to be 3/4 of the track, if not a little bit further to the outside. And the reason for that is two things. One, if you're going down there, you'll have to stand the bike up naturally. Where you are now, you're having to keep the bike leant over and you can't accelerate as hard. So let yourself run out, you'll carry more speed down the hill, you'll carry more momentum on the straight, and as you're carrying that speed out there, you're then going to become more upright as we head to this inside part of the track. At this point, because you've got a lot of lean angle to keep the bike turning, you can't accelerate as hard. So try to use all the track on the way out, then stand it up and accelerate for the inside marshal post, the grass on the white line. And really, once you get to the outside of the track here, in an ideal world, you're as close to being flat out on a superbike as you can. It's difficult to do, but if you're struggling with the bike wheeling or moving about, you can use the rear brake to try to help to control that. So you see that point where you've rolled the throttle there. If you'd been wider initially on the outside of the track and pulled it back to the inside and stood the bike up, you could have accelerated a lot harder past this marshal's post. You'd also be upright and it's a little bit safer. It's less likely to spin and slide as you're getting to that point. And as you come from that marshal's post, you can use more of the track down the straight. Your line for all of that section was just a little bit too in the middle of the track. You weren't really tight at the inside and you weren't using all the track on the way out on the outside. So as my dad always says, you've paid for all the track, use it.